whisper of the breeze, I hear your name.
So when I started working on this project this morning, I told myself I was going to keep things, simple. So that was a mistake already. Because apparently, in game development, even installing packages somehow turns into an emotional side quest where Windows, NPM, permissions, terminals, caches, and what else? Invisible machine spirits all decide to test your patience at the exact same time. So the entire phase was supposed to be straightforward. No gameplay systems yet, no giant architectural decisions, no existential crisis caused by balancing, machine economy values at 3 o'clock in the morning. Just a clean setup phase. Install the exact libraries I needed, make sure the project still worked, build it, and done. That was the plan. Naturally, reality had other ideas, of course. So I started by making sure I was actually inside the correct project folder because I've already reached the point in development where I trust absolutely nothing anymore. One wrong terminal tab, and suddenly you're installing packages into some completely unrelated project from 6 months ago. So, yes, the very first thing I did was basically stare at the terminal like a paranoid detective, trying to confirm if I hadn't ruined my own life. So, thankfully, the directory was correct. It was there. A small victory for me. The kind, developers celebrate privately because nobody else understands how terrifying it is to accidentally run commands in the wrong folder. And after that, I started installing the core runtime libraries I knew the game would eventually rely on. And honestly, this was one of those moments where the project started feeling real. Not idea real, actually, not notes app real, not even, I watched YouTube videos and got overconfident kind of real. Actually, real. This was the first time the project started getting its real foundation. PixiJS went in first because I already knew I wanted strong 2D rendering power for the game world. Then came React integration, what else? State management, save handling, unique IDs, what else? Sound systems, validation tools. Basically, all the invisible systems players never think about while they're happily clicking and playing for 12 hours straight. And I love this part of development. There's something weirdly satisfying about assembling the skeleton of a game before the actual game exists. It feels like building industrial machinery in an empty warehouse before production starts. But unfortunately, NPM decided this would be the perfect time to become dramatic. Apparently, the sandbox environment was still stuck in cache only mode, which basically meant NPM looked at me and said, "Hey, dude, I understand what you want, and I just simply refuse to help you. So, the package causing the problem was Pixie React, which of course happened to be one of the most important ones. So I reran the exact install command with network approval and waited while, silently preparing and praying myself for the possibility that everything would explode. But to my surprise, it actually worked. That was a clean install. Zero vulnerabilities, nothing, no catastrophic dependency apocalypse. Honestly, I was suspicious. Things rarely go that smoothly. Then I installed the TypeScript definitions for Howler because if there's one thing I've learned already, it's that TypeScript can either feel like your best friend or a highly judgmental teacher grading your mistake in real time. Of course, that install also hit the cache restriction, definitely, because consistency matters. So I rerun that command too. Eventually, everything installed correctly, and I finally got to that deeply satisfying moment where you open package.json and see your project, slowly transforming from an empty template into an actual game foundation. And this is probably incredibly boring to normal people, but to developers, this is the equivalent of stacking a workshop with tools before building something big or huge. At this point, the project officially had PixiJS for rendering, React integration, Zustad for centralized game state, and what else? IndexedDB, you know, Nanoid for generating unique identifiers, and of course, Howler for audio, Zod for runtime validation, and of course, TypeScript definitions for Howler. So, in other words, the game was slowly getting electricity. So after verifying everything in package.json, I launched the Vite development server just to make sure I hadn't accidentally broken reality. And somehow it worked immediately. The default React page loaded successfully, and that's like a thousand OKs. No horrifying red error messages or screens, no dependency explosions, no cryptic messages written by ancient software demons. Just a working page sitting there peacefully. I genuinely stared at it for a few seconds because indie development slowly conditions you to expect suffering at every stage. When something works instantly, your brain doesn't celebrate anymore. It becomes suspicious, like, okay, it's working, but what's the catch? Something like something like that. Well, it turns out the catch arrived when I tried stopping the server. Windows basically told me I lacked permission to terminate the process from inside the sandbox environment, which is honestly one of the most Windows sentences ever written. So there I was, not building gameplay, not designing mechanics, not creating art, just fighting for custody over a Vite process. Game development, it's beautiful, doesn't matter how you look at it. And eventually, I got the port cleared and moved on to the production build phase, which is where the project decides whether it respects you or not. The TypeScript phase passed cleanly. Then, Vite immediately hit me with a Windows Sandbox eperm spawn error while trying to load vite.config. Naturally, because if a development session goes too smoothly, the universe starts getting uncomfortable, It's so I rerun the exact build command with elevated approval permissions, which finally allowed Vite to spawn the helper process correctly. And after all that, the production build succeeded completely. That tiny lines felt disproportionately rewarding. Not because the build itself was complicated, but because every successful build feels like a proof that the project is still alive. And honestly, that matters more than people realize. A lot of game development isn't glamorous inspiration or giant creative breakthroughs. Sometimes it's just slowly fighting and wrestling chaos into submission one problem at a time while trying not to destroy your own motivation in the process. So, this entire process was technically just about installing packages and verifying builds, but weirdly enough, it still felt kind of important because now the project actually has bones. The rendering systems exists, the audio system exists, the save structure, the validation systems. What else? The state management. Yeah, the foundation is finally there. The gameplay, no gameplay yet. I mean, no laundry empire, no giant machine networks, no customers, no automation madness. Just clean infrastructure. But honestly, that's how these projects begin quietly, one terminal command at a time. And somewhere between dependency installs and permission errors and build failures and suspiciously successful launches, the game slowly starts becoming real.
The ocean greets the shore, a dance that never ends. The rhythm of the waves, like time it gently bends. Each moment feels so pure, a gift I can't ignore. I find myself complete, not searching.